What would you do if your mechanic father and his tattered wallet were mocked by your wealthy in-laws right at the dinner table? I watched them laugh. But 3 days later, the family office managing their hundreds of millions called him to say they now answer to his commands. This is not just payback. It is the story of how that beat-up wallet held a secret powerful enough to topple the empire they used to humiliate him. My name is Natalie Green. I am 26 years old, a senior financial data analyst who spends her days predicting market crashes. Yet I failed to predict the absolute devastation waiting for me at a dinner table in Connecticut. It was supposed to be a celebration. My husband, Owen Carlyle, and I had just marked our second wedding anniversary. In the world of the Carlyle family, anniversaries were not private affairs. They were summonses. We were expected to appear at the main estate, a sprawling colonial revival mansion that looked less like a home and more like a fortress built to keep reality out. The invitation had been framed as an intimate family dinner, but the moment my father's 10-year-old sedan pulled up the gravel driveway, flanked by the aggressively polished German SUVs of my in-laws, I knew intimate was the wrong word. It was an inspection. My father, Tom Green, stepped out of his car. He had spent the morning at his small mechanic shop, scrubbing the grease from under his fingernails with a bristly brush until his skin was raw and pink. He wore his best Sunday shirt, a blue button-down that he had ironed himself, the creases sharp enough to cut paper, but as he handed his keys to the valet, a kid who looked at my father's car with barely concealed disdain, I saw the first crack in the evening. Dad reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet to tip the valet. It was a trifold leather piece that had once been brown, but was now a map of wear and tear. The edges were fraying, revealing the gray lining underneath. The spine was cracked, held together by sheer willpower and perhaps a few stitches he had added himself years ago. He pulled out a $5 bill, smoothing it against his palm before handing it over. The valet took it with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated. I walked up to him, linking my arm through his. He smelled of Old Spice and that faint, permanent scent of engine oil that no amount of scrubbing could ever truly erase. It was the smell of my childhood, of safety. But here, amidst the scent of manicured boxwoods and expensive cologne, it smelled like vulnerability. "Ready, kiddo?" he asked, patting my hand. "Ready," I lied. We entered the dining room. The table was a long, intimidating slab of walnut that could have seated 30 people, yet only 6 of us were scattered around it. The lighting was dim, designed to make the crystal glasses sparkle and the diamonds on my mother-in-law's neck dance. Victoria Carlyle sat at the head of the table, looking like a queen who had just smelled something rotting. We were barely through the appetizers, some kind of deconstructed scallop dish that cost more than my dad's weekly grocery budget. When the attack began, it was not a frontal assault. The Carlyles did not scream. They operated with the surgical precision of snipers. "Tom," Victoria said, her voice dripping with faux curiosity, "I noticed you having a struggle with the valet outside. That wallet of yours." She paused, picking up her wineglass. "I thought props like that only existed in movies from the 1990s. Is it a vintage piece? Or a statement?" A ripple of polite, cruel laughter went around the table. I felt the piece of artisan bread in my throat turn into a stone. I looked at my dad. He was smiling. That apologetic, good-natured smile he used when a customer was angry about a bill he had already discounted. "Oh, this?" Dad patted his pocket. "No, nothing vintage, Victoria. Just old. I have had it since the day I married Natalie's mother. It still holds money just fine, so I figure, why change it?" Madison, my sister-in-law, was sitting across from me. She was perfect in that terrifying way only 23-year-olds with trust funds can be. Her phone was propped up against her water glass, the camera lens silently capturing the dinner for her followers. I saw her zoom in, not on the food, on my father's jacket pocket where the wallet made a bulky, unrefined outline. She leaned in toward me, her voice a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for everyone to hear. "It is actually kind of cute. Nat, in a retro poverty sort of way, very authentic." My hand gripped my fork so hard, the metal dug into my palm. I wanted to reach across the centerpiece of imported orchids and smash her phone into the wall. I wanted to scream that the wallet was not an aesthetic choice. It was a history book. But I was Natalie Green, the analyst, the girl who had learned to blend in. So I swallowed the rage, forcing it down into the pit of my stomach. "It is sentimental," I said, my voice tight. "Dad values loyalty to things that last." Richard Carlyle, my father-in-law, cleared his throat. He was the head of Carlyle Builders and the overseer of the Carlyle Legacy Family Office, an entity that managed hundreds of millions of dollars. He looked at my father with the tired patience of a man explaining calculus to a toddler. "Sentiment is fine for Christmas ornaments, Tom," Richard said, slicing his steak. "But in the real world, presentation is currency. Walking around with a piece of rubbish in your pocket tells the world you do not respect yourself. At your age, if you have not learned to upgrade your lifestyle, it starts to look less like frugality and more like stubbornness." The table laughed again. This time, it was louder. I looked at Owen, my husband. He was staring at his plate, pushing a potato around with his fork. He did not look up. He did not defend us. "Speaking of upgrades," I said, my voice raising slightly, desperate to pivot the conversation away from the man who had worked double shifts to put me through college. "Richard, how is the new waterfront development in the Seaport District going? I read the initial projections were showing a 20% return on equity." It was a solid question. It was a question that proved I belonged at this table, that I understood their language of yields and margins. Victoria did not even look at me. She kept her eyes on my father. "Natalie, dear," she said, waving her hand dismissively, "do not bore us with shop talk. We are trying to help your father. If you want him to fit into this world, into our family image, you really need to guide his spending habits. Teach him that holding on to trash does not make him noble. It just makes him look desperate." The room went silent. The air conditioner hummed, a low, expensive sound. In that silence, a buzzing noise erupted. It was my father's phone, a generic ringtone, loud and jarring against the soft jazz playing in the background. Dad flushed a deep crimson. "Sorry," he muttered. "I thought I silenced it. It might be the shop." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the wallet again to get to his phone. In his haste, his thumb caught the edge of the leather. The wallet fell open on the white tablecloth. It lay there like an open wound. The plastic window that held his ID was yellowed and cracked. But what drew the eye was not the driver's license. It was the photograph tucked behind it. It was a small, square photo, fading at the edges. My mother, she was laughing, her hair windblown, standing in front of our first tiny rental house. It was the only photo he kept in there. He looked at it every time he opened the wallet to pay for groceries or gas. I saw Madison's eyes light up. She grabbed her phone, adjusting the angle. I watched her screen. She zoomed in on the cracked leather, framing the faded photo of my dead mother like it was a punchline to a joke about hoarding. She covered her mouth, giggling, showing the screen to her fiancé next to her. They were laughing at her. They were laughing at the woman who had died working shifts at a grocery store so I could buy textbooks. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud snap. It was the quiet, terrifying sound of a bridge collapsing underwater. I realized then that this was not just about class differences. This was not just snobbery. This was a fundamental lack of humanity. They did not just think they were better than us. They thought we were entertainment. They thought my father's life, his struggle, his grief, was a prop for their dinner party amusement. Dad quickly folded the wallet, his hands shaking slightly. He declined the call and slid it back into his pocket. He picked up his water glass, but he did not drink. He just held it, staring at the condensation on the outside. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The man who could lift an engine block looked crushed by the weight of their judgment. "Sorry," he whispered again. "To the Carlyle legacy," Richard said suddenly, raising his glass of wine that cost $300 a bottle. "And to maintaining our standards." "To standards," the table echoed. I did not raise my glass. Under the table, I reached out and found my father's hand. His palm was rough, calloused, warm. I squeezed it, hard. "I am so sorry, Dad," I whispered, barely moving my lips. He looked at me. His eyes were watery, but he forced that gentle smile back onto his face. He shook his head slightly. "It is okay, honey," he mouthed. "It does not matter." But he was wrong. I looked at Richard, wiping the grease from his lips with a linen napkin. I looked at Victoria, checking her reflection in the back of a spoon. I looked at Madison, posting her story to the world. It matters, I thought. The wallet in my father's pocket was not just old leather. It was the vessel that had carried every dollar that kept me alive. It held the memory of the woman who made me, and these people, with their millions and their legacy office and their hollow souls, had just declared war on it. They thought they were mocking a mechanic. They had no idea they were mocking the only man in the room who actually knew the value of a dollar. I squeezed his hand again, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel like the poor girl lucky to be at the rich table. I felt like a spy in enemy territory. And as the dinner continued, my mind stopped analyzing the conversation and started analyzing the targets. "No, Dad," I thought, staring at Richard's smug face. "It is not okay, and I'm going to make sure they pay for this bill, with interest." The silence of the Carlisle dining room faded, replaced in my mind by the rhythmic, metallic clanking of a socket wrench hitting concrete. To understand why that leather wallet meant the world to me, you have to understand where it lived before it ended up on a walnut table in Connecticut. It lived in the back pocket of a pair of grease-stained coveralls in a rusted town in the Midwest, where the sky was perpetually gray and the factories were slowly dying out like great, heaving beasts. My childhood was not a tragedy. Though Madison would probably describe it as one for her social media followers, it was a life built on friction. The friction of tires on pavement, of metal on metal, and of my father's will against the crushing weight of economic reality. We lived in a small, siding-clad house where the linoleum curled at the corners in the kitchen. My mother worked the register at a grocery chain, her hands always smelling faintly of receipts and sanitizer, while Dad was an industrial mechanic. Our backyard was not a garden. It was a graveyard for machines, washing machines, lawnmowers, busted alternators. Dad dragged them all home. He was a surgeon of scrap. He would spend his weekends resurrecting these things, selling a refurbished dryer for $50 here, a lawnmower for $30 there. And the bank for all this commerce was that wallet. I remember being 7 years old, standing in our kitchen, clutching a permission slip for a field trip to the Science Museum. The cost was $12. In the grand scheme of the world, $12 was nothing. But in our house, on a Tuesday before payday, $12 was a mathematical problem. Dad sat at the round laminate table, his hands scrubbed, but still showing the dark outlines of grease in his fingerprints. He pulled the wallet out. Even then, 20 years ago, it looked tired. He opened it, and I watched his lips move silently as he counted. There were mostly singles, crinkled and soft from changing hands too many times. "Let us see here. Natty," he whispered. He laid the bills out. 1, 2, 3. He smoothed a $5 bill against the edge of the table to flatten a dog-eared corner. He did not sigh. He never sighed in front of me. He just calculated. He looked at the pile, then at the empty space in the billfold where lunch money for his week should have been. "You are going to see the dinosaurs, right?" he asked, looking up with a grin that reached his eyes. "Yes, and the planetarium," I said, holding my breath. "Well, we cannot have you missing the stars," he said. He handed me the money, pressing the crumpled bills into my small palm. "Put that in your backpack, zipper pocket. Do not lose it." I found out years later that he skipped lunch for 4 days to make those $12 back. But at the time, all I saw was a magician pulling happiness out of a leather hat. The wallet had a history that predated me. It was the first gift my mother ever bought him, back when they were just two broke kids trying to start a life. It was cheap leather, bought from a discount bin, but she had paid extra to have their names scratched into the inside flap. Tom and Martha. Over time, the friction of his pocket had rubbed the gold leaf away, leaving just the indentations of their names, like a scar in the leather. There was a shadow over that wallet, too, a story I only heard in fragments when I was supposed to be asleep, before I was born. There had been a bad year, a failed venture, a predatory loan, a moment where they almost lost the house. Dad had kept the wallet from that era as a reminder. He told me once, when I asked why he did not buy a nylon one with Velcro like the other dads, that leather remembers. "I promised your mother," he said, rubbing his thumb over the spine of the wallet, "that as long as I carried this, I would never let us get that close to the edge again. It is my contract, Nat." He kept his word, but not in the way the Carlyles would understand. He did not make millions. He made safety. He was obsessed with my education. While other kids got video games, I got secondhand encyclopedias and, eventually, a clunky, refurbished desktop computer he had bartered for fixing a neighbor's transmission. He did not want me to know how to fix cars. He wanted me to know how the numbers worked. "Your hands are for typing, Natty, not for scrubbing," he would say when I tried to help him in the garage. "You are going to be the one who signs the checks, not the one who waits for them." My most vivid memory, the one that makes my chest ache when I look at him now, is of the late nights. I would wake up for a glass of water at 2 a.m. and find him sitting at the kitchen table. The house would be silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator. He would have an ancient laptop open, a brick of a machine he had saved from a scrap heap, and the wallet sitting next to him. I used to think he was agonizing over bills. I thought he was deciding which utility to pay late. One night, I crept up behind him. "Daddy, are we in trouble?" He jumped, closing the laptop lid halfway. Then he saw it was me and relaxed. He pulled me onto his lap. "No, baby, we are not in trouble. We are building." He turned the screen back to me. I expected to see a bank statement. Instead, I saw rows of data, charts, green and red candlesticks. It was a trading platform, a cheap low-fee brokerage interface. "What is that?" I asked. "This," he pointed to a jagged line, "is a company that makes the steel for the bearings I installed today. I know their steel is good, so I bought a little piece of them." "With what money?" $10 here, $20 there," he whispered, like it was a secret between conspirators. "Instead of a beer, I buy a share. It is slow. Natty, slower than watching paint dry, but it grows." He was not just a mechanic. He was a student of the economy he physically maintained. While the men in the Carlyle family were playing golf and making deals in boardrooms, my father was learning the same principles at a sticky kitchen table in his underwear, investing the price of a sandwich into companies he understood from the inside out. He never missed a moment. That is the other thing the Carlyles got wrong about the struggling working-class narrative. They assume poverty means absence. They assume my father was too busy working to care. But he was there, every science fair, every math league competition. When I won the regional data analytics prize in high school, he and Mom were in the front row. He was wearing his work boots because he had come straight from the shop, but he was standing the tallest, holding up a camcorder he had borrowed from a neighbor. Then came the silence. When Mom died of ovarian cancer during my senior year of high school, the house felt like it had collapsed in on itself. The medical bills were a tsunami. They ate the savings. They ate the life insurance. But they did not eat the wallet. After the funeral, I found him sitting on the back porch, staring at the scrap metal in the yard. He was holding the wallet open. He had taken her driver's license photo, the last one, where she looked tired but still smiled, and slid it behind the plastic window where his own ID used to be. "She goes where I go," he said. His voice was cracked, broken. "I cannot lose this, Nat. If I lose this, I do not know who I am." That was when the fear started for me. I looked at that beat-up piece of leather and I did not see a wallet anymore. I saw his heart. He carried his grief in his back pocket, sitting on it every day, driving with it, working with it. I went to college on a patchwork of scholarships and student loans. I chose financial data analysis not just because I was good at math, but because I wanted to understand the monster that had scared my father his whole life. I wanted to master the system. During those 4 years, envelopes would arrive in my campus mailbox. Inside, wrapped in a sheet of notebook paper, would be two $20 bills, $40. It was not enough to pay tuition, but it was enough for pizza, for coffee, for a movie. The note was always the same. Eat something good. I am fine. The shop is busy. Love, Dad. I knew he was eating instant noodles so he could send those $40. I knew he was wearing shoes with holes in the soles so I could have coffee with friends and feel normal. That was why I fell for Owen. When I met Owen Carlyle, with his soft hands and his easy confidence, I did not see a meal ticket. I saw an escape hatch. I saw a way to ensure that my father would never have to worry again. I thought that by marrying into the Carlyle family, I was bringing my father honor. I thought I was showing him, "Look, Dad, we made it. You do not have to count the singles anymore." I wanted him to be proud. I wanted him to sit at a table where the food was plentiful and the wine flowed, and feel like a king. I never imagined that the very symbol of his sacrifice, that wallet, would become the weapon they used to strip him of his dignity. The memory that haunts me most now, as I sit at this table of sharks, is from a month ago. We were at the supermarket back home. Dad fumbled with the wallet, and it slipped from his hands. It hit the linoleum, and a few coins rolled out, spinning and clattering loudly. A woman behind us sighed impatiently. Dad scrambled to pick them up, his knees popping. He looked up at me, his face red, and laughed. A genuine, self-deprecating laugh. "Butterfingers," he said. "Guess the old girl is getting tired." He patted the wallet like a faithful dog. He was happy. He was unashamed. But here, under the crystal chandelier, the wallet looked different. It looked like a crime. And as I watched Madison zoom in on the fraying threads, I realized I had made a terrible mistake. I had brought a man who measured value in love and sacrifice into a room full of people who only knew how to measure price. They saw trash. I saw the only thing that had ever kept me warm. The beginning of the end started 3 years ago. Not in a dining room, but in a sterile, air-conditioned conference hall in downtown Boston. I was attending the Northeast Financial Data Summit, a gathering of people who find romance in spreadsheets and poetry and predictive algorithms. Owen Carlyle was the keynote speaker for the afternoon session. He walked onto the stage looking like a stock photo of generational wealth. He had the jawline, the perfectly tailored navy suit, and that specific kind of hair that never seems to move, even in a draft. His speech was titled, "The Future of Legacy Wealth." It was charming, vague, and full of buzzwords. He spoke about stewardship and family responsibility. When he opened the floor for questions, I stood up. I was 23, hungry for recognition, and wearing a blazer I had bought at a thrift store. "Mr. Carlyle," I said into the microphone, my voice steady, "you talk about stewardship, but your family's firm, Carlyle Builders, has a debt-to-equity ratio that defies current market safety standards. How do you reconcile legacy with that level of leveraged risk?" The room went quiet. Most people did not ask the Carlyles about their math. They just asked for their autographs. Owen blinked. Then, he smiled. It was a genuine, disarming smile. "That is a terrifyingly accurate question," he said. "Find me after the panel. I would love to show you the numbers that help me sleep at night." I thought I had found a unicorn. Our courtship was a series of carefully constructed contradictions. Owen seemed determined to prove he was not like his family. He did not take me to Michelin-star restaurants. He took me to hole-in-the-wall burger joints where the tables were sticky. We went hiking in state parks where he wore muddy boots and complained about blisters just like anyone else. He drove a modest SUV when he was with me, leaving the flashier cars in the garage. "I am the black sheep," he told me once, lying on a blanket in the park. "My father cares about the empire. My mother cares about the image. I just care about this real life." I believed him. I wanted to believe him. It felt like a modern fairy tale where the prince steps down from the tower to live in the village. The first time my father met Owen, I was terrified. We arranged a lunch at a neutral location, a steakhouse that was nice but not intimidating. My dad wore his best flannel shirt, tucked in. Owen wore a suit, because he was coming from a meeting. When they shook hands, the contrast was glaring. My father's hand was thick, scarred, and permanently stained with oil in the creases. Owen's hand was smooth, manicured, adorned with a Patek Philippe watch that cost more than my father's entire house. Dad looked at the watch, then up at Owen. He smiled, his eyes crinkling. "Nice hardware, son," Dad said, his voice easy. "Just make sure all that weight on your wrist does not make you forget how to roll up your sleeves." Owen laughed, a loud, hearty sound. "I will try to keep that in mind, sir." But from the other side of the booth, I saw it. Victoria, who had insisted on stopping by to meet the man whose daughter was stealing her son, froze. Her smile remained fixed, but her eyes turned into shards of ice. She looked at my father's hands, then at his flannel, and finally at Owen laughing with him. It was a look of pure, distilled contempt. She did not see a father giving advice. She saw a peasant daring to lecture a king. "How quaint," Victoria said, taking a sip of her iced tea. "Richard always says that people who roll up their sleeves are the ones who haven't figured out how to hire someone else to do it." The table went silent. Owen cleared his throat and changed the subject to the weather. I let it slide. I told myself it was just a generational difference. When we got engaged, the red flags started waving harder, but I was too blinded by the ring to see them clearly. The first time I brought Dad to the Carlisle estate for the formal engagement party, I felt the walls closing in. The house was magnificent. High ceilings, original oil paintings, the smell of old money which is a mix of lavender and floor wax, but the atmosphere was suffocating. Dad took off his coat, a heavy wool parka that had seen better days. He folded it neatly. When he placed it on the entryway bench, Victoria stared at it as if he had just placed a dead animal on her furniture. Then, Dad pulled out his wallet to check if he had the valet ticket. The tatters of the leather caught the light of the chandelier. "Oh," Victoria said, loud enough for the staff to hear. "We have a safe in the study. Mr. Green, if you are worried about losing whatever is in there." "It is fine right here. Thanks," Dad said, patting his pocket. She turned to me, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He is very rustic, isn't he? We might need to get him a stylist before the wedding photos. We cannot have him looking like the gardener." I bit my tongue. I looked at Owen, waiting for him to step in, to say that my father looked fine. Owen just adjusted his tie and walked into the other room to get a drink. Then came the contract. 2 months before the wedding, Richard Carlisle summoned us to his study. He slid a thick document across the mahogany desk. "Standard procedure, Natalie," Richard said, his voice smooth. "To protect the Carlisle legacy, it is nothing personal, just risk management to ensure that no external variables complicate the family assets." He meant me. I was the external variable. I was the risk. "I understand," I said. I took the document to my father that night. We sat at our kitchen table, the same way we used to sit when he helped me with my calculus homework. Dad put on his reading glasses, the cheap ones from the drugstore, and read every single line. "You do not have to sign this if it hurts you, Nat," he said gently. "I do not care about their money, Dad. I just want Owen." "Then we read it to make sure they do not take what is yours," he said. He found it on page 42. It was a dense paragraph about asset forfeiture and trust management. Dad frowned, tracing the line with his calloused finger. "Look at this," he murmured. "Clause 14b. I read it. In the event of financial malfeasance, fraud, or gross negligence attributed to the primary beneficiary, Owen Carlisle, all voting rights and access to the family trust shall be immediately suspended and transferred to an independent monitor, as designated by the original grantor's deed." That is weird, I said. Why would they put a clause about Owen committing fraud in a prenup? It is not about the prenup, Dad said, his eyes narrowing. This is copy-pasted from the main family trust. They are acknowledging that Owen does not actually own his share until he proves he is not a crook. He looked up at me, his expression unreadable. It mentions an independent monitor. Someone outside the family has the power to pull the plug on them. Who? It does not say, Dad said. He closed the document. Sign it, Natalie, but keep a copy of this page. Just keep it. I signed. I married Owen. The wedding was lavish, funded entirely by the Carlyles, who used it as a networking event for their business partners. My side of the aisle was small, just Dad and a few cousins. Dad wore a rented tuxedo that fit him surprisingly well, though Victoria made a snide comment about him cleaning up acceptable enough. After the honeymoon, I started a new job at a startup called Harborline Quant Lab. It was a gritty, high-pressure environment where we analyzed massive data sets for institutional investors. It was the perfect place for me. Objective, cold, factual. It was there that the whispers started. 6 months into the job, I was in the break room getting coffee. 2 senior analysts were arguing about a construction conglomerate in the Northeast. The numbers do not add up, one of them said. They are shifting debt between shell companies. It looks like the Carlyle method. My stomach dropped. What did you say? The analyst looked at me, realizing who I was. Oh, nothing, Natalie. Just industry slang. Ignore me. But I could not ignore it. I went back to my desk and stared at my screens. I remembered Richard's arrogance. I remembered the clause in the prenup. I remembered the way Owen would sometimes come home late, smelling of stress and scotch, refusing to talk about work. The red flags were no longer waving. They were slapping me in the face. At home, the dynamic was shifting. The fairy tale was leaking. Every Sunday dinner at the mansion became a subtle interrogation. Natalie, surely a data analyst makes enough to buy her father a proper coat? Madison would ask, smirking over her salad. Or does he prefer the homeless chic look? He likes that coat, I would say, my voice tight. And the car? Victoria would add. It rattles, dear. It disturbs the neighbors. I would look at Owen. Owen? He would sigh, looking pained, as if I were the one making things difficult. Mom is just trying to help. Nat, maybe we should lease him a new car. It would be easier for everyone. Easier for everyone. That was Owen's motto. He did not want to stand up to them. He wanted to erase the things that annoyed them. And the thing that annoyed them most was my origin. They were chipping away at me, piece by piece. They made me feel like my loyalty to my father was a character flaw, a remnant of a lower evolution that I needed to shed to become a true Carlyle. But they did not know who they were dealing with. They saw a quiet girl with a calculator. They did not see the daughter of Tom Green, a man who could fix anything if he had enough time and the right tools. And as I sat at my desk at Harborline Quant Lab, looking at the encrypted data files of anonymous construction firms, I realized I had the ultimate tool right at my fingertips. I just needed a reason to use it. The scent of roast duck and expensive beeswax candles should have been comforting, but to me, it smelled like a trap. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, feeling the heavy linen napkin against my skin, listening to the scraping of silver knives against porcelain plates. It was a rhythmic, aggressive sound, like tiny swords being sharpened. I was back in the moment, trapped inside my own head while the scene played out in agonizing slow motion. In part 1, I told you what happened, but I did not tell you what it felt like to sit there and watch my father be dismantled, piece by piece, by the people I had legally bound myself to. Victoria set her wine glass down. The red liquid swirled, coating the crystal. She did not look at me. She looked through me, focusing her gaze on my father's hands, which were resting tentatively on the table. You know, Natalie, she said, her voice smooth and dangerous. It has been 2 years since you officially joined this family. I would have thought by now you might have helped your father upgrade his lifestyle a little. It reflects on all of us, really. She turned her head slightly, locking eyes with Dad. Tell me, Tom, do you have a retirement plan? Or do you intend to keep sliding under cars until your back finally gives out and you just drop dead on a concrete floor? My breath hitched. It was not a question. It was a verdict. Dad wiped his mouth, his movements slow and deliberate. I like my work, Victoria. Keeps me moving. And as for retirement, I have enough put away to keep the lights on. Keep the lights on, Madison repeated. Giggling into her salad, she looked at her fiancé, then back at Dad with eyes wide with mock sympathy. That is so sweet. Maybe for Christmas. We should get you a new wallet, Mr. Green. You know, one that does not look like it survived a war. I think I saw a charity drive collecting old leather goods for refugees. Yours would fit right in. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at Owen. He was chewing his duck, his eyes fixed on his plate. Say something, I screamed inside my head. Say anything. Richard chimed in, leaning back in his chair, the master of his domain. It is a valid question. Though, do you even use credit cards, Tom? Or do you operate purely in cash like those people who think the government is tracking their bank accounts? It must be exhausting counting out change at the grocery store. I use cards when I need to, Dad said, his voice steady but quieter than before. He tried to shift the energy, to be the bigger man. Actually, speaking of the past, I found this photo of Natalie the other day. It was her first day of kindergarten. He reached for the wallet. My stomach turned over. I knew what was coming. He opened the battered leather flaps, his fingers, thick and scarred, fumbled slightly with the plastic insert. He wanted to show them that we had memories, that we were a family, not just a tax bracket. She had this little backpack, he started to say, smiling at the memory. Oh my God, Madison whispered loudly. Look at the stitching on that thing. It is literally hanging by a thread. The table erupted in laughter. It was not boisterous laughter. It was light, airy, suffocating laughter. Dad stopped. He did not pull the photo out. He looked at the wallet, then at the smiling faces around him, and he slowly closed it. He pulled his hand back, sliding the wallet off the table and into his lap, hiding it away like a shameful secret. That gesture broke me, the way he curled his shoulders inward, making himself smaller to avoid their ridicule. I turned to Owen. I grabbed his forearm, my nails digging into his suit jacket. Owen, I whispered, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. Do something. Owen glanced at me, then at his mother. He patted my hand, a condescending, placating rhythm. Nat, relax, he murmured, barely moving his lips. Do not let it get to you. They are just teasing. It is how they are. Do not make a scene. I pulled my hand away as if he burned me. It is how they are. That was his defense. He was not a neutral party. He was an accomplice. I felt a cold wave of isolation wash over me. I was sitting next to my husband, but I had never been more alone. It is a good thing Natalie did not inherit those financial habits, Victoria said, slicing a piece of pear. Can you imagine? If she managed our accounts with that kind of mindset, the Carlyle Legacy Family Office would absolutely lose its mind. We need people who understand wealth, not people who hoard pennies. The air left the room. Excuse me, I said. I stood up so abruptly my chair scraped loudly against the floor. I need to use the restroom. I did not wait for permission. I walked out of the dining room, my heels clicking on the marble floor of the hallway. I kept my head high until I reached the guest powder room. I went inside and turned the lock. The silence in the bathroom was absolute. I gripped the edges of the sink, staring at myself in the mirror. My makeup was flawless. My dress was silk. My jewelry was tasteful. But the woman staring back at me looked stupid. You idiot, I hissed at my reflection. You absolute, naive idiot. I had brought him here. I had exposed him to this. I thought I could bridge the gap. But all I had done was serve my father up as entertainment for a bored aristocracy. My eyes burned, hot tears threatening to ruin the mascara. but I refused to let them fall. I would not cry for them. I heard footsteps outside, the click-clack of heels on the marble. Then, voices. They had stopped right outside the door, likely checking their makeup in the hallway mirror. I mean, honestly, Madison's voice drifted through the wood. It is embarrassing. Mom, why does Owen bring him here? It smells like motor oil every time he walks in. Owen has a soft spot for strays, Victoria replied. Her voice was lower, more calculating. But we need to be careful. I spoke to the trustees yesterday. We need to make sure Natalie is ring-fenced from the core investment decisions. She is too attached to that. Middle-class poverty mindset. You saw her face when we joked about the wallet. She takes it personally. She is never going to be one of us, is she? Madison asked. She is a useful analyst, dear, Victoria said. But no, she is not a Carlyle. She is just a tourist, and we need to make sure she does not get the keys to the kingdom. The voices faded as they walked back toward the dining room. I stood there, frozen. The coldness that had started at the table now filled my entire body. It was clarifying. It was sharp. They did not just hate my background. They were actively plotting to neutralize me. They saw me as a temporary fixture, a tourist in their world. And my father? He was just a prop to prove how benevolent they were for letting us in. I took a deep breath. I reached into my purse and pulled out a tissue, dabbing the corners of my eyes. I checked my teeth. I smoothed my dress. When I unlocked the door, Natalie the daughter was gone. Natalie the senior data analyst had taken her place. I walked back into the dining room. The conversation had moved on to summer plans in the Hamptons. I sat down. I did not look at Owen. I looked at my father. He was staring at his water glass, looking tired. I looked at the wallet, which he had placed back on the table near his right hand, almost defiantly. It lay there, scarred and brown against the white tablecloth. It looked like a battlefield. I did not reach out to hold his hand this time. I did not offer comfort. Instead, I started recording, not with a phone, but with my mind. I memorized the smirk on Richard's face as he swirled his wine. I memorized the way Victoria deliberately ignored my father's empty glass. I memorized the indifference in Owen's posture. I treated the dinner table like a data set. Every insult was a data point. Every dismissive gesture was a trend line. And the projection was clear. This relationship was insolvent. The dinner dragged on for another 45 minutes. I ate my food. I answered questions with monosyllables. I was the perfect, obedient daughter-in-law, just quiet enough to be ignored. Finally, the torture ended. We stood up to leave. Thank you for dinner, Victoria. Richard, Dad said. He was still polite. He was still a gentleman, even when surrounded by wolves. It was generous of you to have us. Victoria stood in the doorway, her arms crossed. She looked down at Dad's shoes, then up to his eyes. You are welcome, Tom, she said. Then she delivered the final blow, the one that sealed her fate. Next time, do try to bring a wallet that is a bit more fashionable. We would hate for the staff to think we are inviting just anyone in off the street. Richard chuckled. Madison smirked. Dad froze. He patted his pocket, his face falling. I looked at Victoria. I looked at her perfect hair, her expensive skin, her hollow eyes. Good night, I said. My voice was ice. We walked to the valet stand. The cool night air hit my face, but it did not cool the fire in my chest. As we waited for Dad's car, I looked at him. He looked broken. He looked like he wanted to apologize to me for existing. I am sorry, Nat, he whispered. I did not mean to embarrass you. You did not embarrass me, Dad, I said, and I meant it. The valet brought his car around. The engine sputtered slightly as it idled. I watched him get in. I watched him drive away, his taillights fading into the dark driveway of the estate that hated him. I turned back to the house. Owen was waiting for me by the door, checking his watch. Ready to go? He asked. That was not so bad, was it? I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized I was looking at a stranger. No, I said softly. It was educational. I got into his car, and as we drove away, I did not think about the humiliation. I thought about the files on my laptop. I thought about the family office. I thought about the fashionable world they were so proud of. They wanted fashionable? I would show them what happens when you look too closely at the threads holding their expensive suits together. They had declared war on my father's wallet. Fine, I was going to use that wallet to buy their ruin. I did not go home and cry into my pillow. I did not wake Owen up to scream at him. I did something much more dangerous. I went into the guest bedroom, locked the door, and opened my laptop. Tears are a release, but data is a weapon, and right now, I needed ammunition. I logged into the secure remote server of Harborline Quant Lab. The screen glowed with the cold, blue light of the interface, a stark contrast to the warm, suffocating candlelight of the Carlisle dining room. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I was not looking for family gossip. I was looking for patterns. Our firm specialized in risk assessment for institutional investors. We often dealt with anonymized data, huge blocks of capital moving through the market like whales underwater. But tonight, I had a specific set of coordinates. I pulled up the risk analysis reports for the Northeast construction sector. I filtered for high yield, high-risk developments that had been flagged in the last quarter. There it was. Richard had bragged at dinner about the Seaport expansion project. He had called it a gold mine with 20% returns. In our system, it was listed under a holding company code, North Atlantic Ventures LLC. I drilled down into the financials of North Atlantic Ventures. The system had flagged it red, bright, screaming crimson. The data told a story that Richard Carlisle would never tell over wine. The project was not funded by organic growth or standard bank loans. It was being propped up by a series of circular loans. Company A borrowed from Company B, which was capitalized by Company C, which was essentially just a shell account managed by the Carlisle Legacy Family Office. I sat back in my chair, the air in my lungs turning to ice. They were churning money. They were taking capital from the family trust, the stable money meant to secure the future for people like Owen, and pumping it into a failing construction project to make the balance sheets look healthy for the quarterly review. It was a Ponzi scheme of their own making. My eyes scanned the debt ratios. Leverage was at 400%. If interest rates ticked up by even 0.5%, the whole house of cards would collapse. And if it collapsed, it would take everything. Owen's trust fund, the estate, the very table we had eaten dinner at. Then, a memory flashed in my mind, the prenuptial agreement. I scrambled to find the digital copy I had saved on my private cloud drive. I scrolled frantically to Clause 14b. The words seemed to jump off the screen now. In the event of substantiated financial negligence or risk exposure exceeding 30% of the total trust value, voting rights shall be suspended and transferred to the independent monitor. 30%. The exposure on the Seaport project was nearly 45% of the liquid assets. Richard had not just been arrogant at dinner. He had been terrified. He was bullying my father because he needed to feel powerful, all while knowing that he was standing on a trapdoor that was slowly unlatching. But who was the independent monitor? The contract did not say. It just referenced a deed of stewardship from 1998. I closed the laptop. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. I looked at the closed door of the master bedroom where Owen was sleeping, blissfully unaware that his inheritance was being used as insulation for a burning building. I did not want to destroy him, but I could not let his father drive them off a cliff. I drove to my father's shop at 7 in the morning. The garage was already open. The smell of coffee and degreaser hit me, the perfume of honesty. Dad was under a Ford pickup, wrench in hand. "Dad," I said, my voice shaking. He slid out on his creeper, wiping his hands on a rag. He saw the stack of papers in my hand, printouts of the risk reports. He saw the look on my face. "You found it," he said. He did not ask what I found. He just knew. "Dad, they are leveraging the trust," I said, speaking fast. "Richard is moving money through shell companies. The Seaport project is a disaster. If the market turns, they lose everything. Owen loses everything." Dad stood up, sighing. He walked over to the workbench, where his lunchbox sat, and next to it, the wallet. "I tried to tell Richard that 10 years ago," Dad said softly. He called me a mechanic with a small mind. You knew?" "Natalie," he said, picking up the wallet, "why do you think I told you to read that prenup so carefully?" He opened the wallet. He bypassed the cash compartment. He bypassed the credit card slots. He reached into a hidden fold behind the coin pouch, a place I did not even know existed. He pulled out a piece of paper. It was old. The edges were soft as fabric, worn down by decades of being sat on, pressed against his hip. It was folded into a tiny square. He unfolded it with the reverence of a priest handling a holy text. He smoothed it out on the oily workbench. "Read this," he said. It was a letter. The handwriting was jagged, aggressive, but shaky. It was dated May 12th, 2001. To Thomas Green. "If you are reading this, it means my son has forgotten the first rule we wrote on that napkin. Never bet what you cannot afford to lose. You were the only one who had the guts to tell me when I was being a fool. Tom, you saved this company in '95 when the banks wanted to gut us. I am putting the failsafe in your hands. You are the only one I trust to pull the brake. Signed, Arthur Carlyle." I looked up at my father, my mouth agape. "You knew Owen's grandfather?" "I fixed his first Cadillac," Dad said, staring at the paper. "We got to talking. He liked that I didn't treat him like a god. He hired me as a consultant, not on the books, just practical advice. When he wanted to build that massive complex in the wetlands, everyone told him yes. I told him the ground was too soft, and the insurance would kill him. I was right. Saved him $50 million. Dad's eyes hardened. When Arthur died, Richard took over. The first thing he did was fire me. Said he didn't need a grease monkey looking at his spreadsheets. He wanted to gamble. Arthur knew that. So, Arthur set up a shadow structure. Dad pointed to a line at the bottom of the letter. "In the event of a breach of protocol, the Glen Ridge Stewardship Office is instructed to transfer executive proxy to my designated independent monitor, Thomas Green." "You," I whispered, "you are the independent monitor." "I am the brake," Dad corrected. "I have been waiting 20 years, hoping I would never have to use this. I did not want you to know. I wanted you to love Owen for Owen, not because his family owed me. I wanted you to build your own life." He looked at the wallet. "This is why I keep it. Nat, it is not just about your mom. It is about this letter. It is the only safe place I have for it. Richard sees a piece of trash. Arthur saw a vault." I looked at the printouts from Harborline in my hand, and then at the letter on the workbench. The pieces clicked together with the precision of a well-oiled machine. I had the evidence of the breach. Dad had the authority to act on it. If we combined these two things, we could stop Richard. We could freeze the assets. We could save the company from bankruptcy. But in doing so, we would humiliate Richard Carlyle in a way that he would never forgive. And Owen would see his father stripped of power by his wife and his father-in-law. "If we do this," Dad said, watching my face, "there is no going back. It is nuclear. Natalie, they will hate us. Maybe even Owen." "They already hate us." "Dad," I said, my voice hardening as I remembered the laughter at the dinner table. "They hate us because they think we are weak. They think we are nothing." I looked at the red ink on my report. Richard is going to crash that family into a wall at 100 miles an hour. Saving them is not an act of war. It is an act of mercy, even if they scream while we do it. I picked up the old letter. It smelled of leather and engine oil. It smelled like power. "What do we do?" I asked. Dad took a deep breath. He picked up a rag and wiped a smudge of grease off the workbench, revealing the clean wood underneath. "We make a call," he said, "to the Glen Ridge Stewardship Office, and we tell them it is time to open the books." We met Elias Thorne at a diner 3 towns over, a place where the linoleum was peeling and the coffee was served in thick, ceramic mugs that held heat better than they held flavor. Elias was 78 years old, a man made of sharp angles and tweed. He had been Arthur Carlyle's personal attorney for 40 years, and though he had retired the day Richard took over, his mind was still a steel trap. He did not look like a man who held the secrets of a dynasty. He looked like a grandfather waiting for a bus. But when my father slid the folded, oil-stained letter across the Formica table, Elias put on his spectacles, and the transformation was immediate. He was no longer a retiree. He was a shark in shallow waters. "I wondered if this day would ever come," Elias said, his voice raspy but clear. He ran a finger over Arthur's signature. Arthur died terrified. Not of death. He was terrified of Richard's ego. "Is it valid?" I asked. My hands were clasped tight on the table. "Can this actually stop them?" Elias looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "My dear, this is not just valid. It is the keystone of the entire Carlyle estate. Arthur knew his son. He knew Richard treated the market like a casino. So, he split the assets. He explained it to us, drawing a diagram on a paper napkin. The Carlyle fortune was not one big pile of gold. It was divided. The visible assets, the houses, the cars, the operating cash, were under Richard's control. But the core capital, the massive equity blocks that actually generated the wealth, was locked in a blind trust managed by the Glenridge Stewardship Office. "Glenridge is a ghost firm," Elias said, tapping the napkin. "They do not invest. They do not advise. They only protect. Their mandate is singular: preserve the principal, and they have a trigger clause. If the risk exposure on the operating side exceeds 30%, or if there is evidence of systemic malfeasance, the voting rights for the core capital automatically transfer." "Transfer to who?" Dad asked, though he already knew the answer. "To the designated independent monitor," Elias said. He looked at my father with a mixture of amusement and respect. "You, Thomas, Arthur always said you were the only man who ever told him no to his face and meant it." "But why hasn't Glenridge acted?" I asked. "The numbers are screaming red." "Because Glenridge operates in a silo," Elias replied. "They see the trust's balance, not the operating company's daily shell games. Richard is hiding the losses in subsidiary debt, off the books that Glenridge monitors. They suspect rot, but they need proof. They need a smoking gun to pull the trigger." I sat back, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "I have the gun." I told them about the Harbor Line data, the risk reports, the clear trail of circular financing that disguised the debt as equity. Elias listened, nodding slowly, a smile, thin and sharp, curled his lips. "That is it. That is the breach. But we have to be surgical. You cannot just steal the data. Natalie, that is corporate espionage. You have to be a whistleblower." The plan we hatched over cold coffee and stale toast was not a revenge plot. It was a compliance procedure. I would go back to Harbor Line. I would flag the North Atlantic Ventures account, the Carlyle Shell Company, as a Level 3 risk violation. I would submit a formal, anonymized report to our internal compliance officer, citing fiduciary irresponsibility regarding a major trust fund. By law, Harbor Line would be obligated to notify the primary stakeholders of that trust. The stakeholder was Glenridge. Once Glenridge received an independent, third-party risk assessment from a major analytics firm confirming the fraud, their mandate would activate. They would be legally compelled to call the monitor. My father sat in silence for a long time. He looked at the napkin, then at his hands. "I do not want their money," Dad said softly. "I do not want to run their company. I fix cars. Natalie, I do not fix empires." "You are not doing it for the money." "Dad," I said, "you are doing it because if you do not, Owen goes down with the ship. Richard is going to bankrupt his own son." Dad looked up. The reluctance in his eyes shifted, hardening into resolve. He was not a man who sought power, but he was a man who protected his pack, and somehow, despite everything, he still counted Owen as part of the pack. "Okay," Dad said. "We make the call." The next 2 weeks were an exercise in psychological warfare. I went to work. I filed the report. I hit send on the document that would dismantle my father-in-law's life, and then I went to the break room and made a cup of green tea. The silence after I sent it was deafening, but on the surface, everything remained the same. I had to keep playing the role. I attended a charity brunch at the Carlisle estate that Sunday. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and entitlement. Victoria was in rare form. She was planning a renovation of the summer house in Martha's Vineyard, complaining about the cost of imported Italian marble while sipping a mimosa that cost more than my dad's hourly rate. "It is just so hard to find good artisans these days," Victoria sighed, gesturing vaguely with her glass. "Everyone wants to be paid a fortune for mediocre work. It is the lack of discipline in the lower classes. They want the reward without the refinement." She turned her gaze to me. "Speaking of lack of refinement, Natalie, did your father receive the catalog I sent over? The one for leather goods? I really think a new wallet would do wonders for his public image. We have the fall gala coming up, and I simply cannot have him pulling that dead animal out of his pocket in front of the senator." The table went quiet. Owen shifted in his seat, looking at his shoes. Madison giggled, covering her mouth with a napkin. In the past, I would have blushed. I would have stammered an apology. I would have promised to talk to him. But I was not that girl anymore. I was the girl who had just handed the execution order to the executioner. I looked at Victoria. I saw the lines of tension around her eyes, the desperate need to control every micro-interaction because she had lost control of the macro-reality. She was not powerful. She was fragile. I picked up my water glass. I took a slow sip. "Dad got the catalog. Victoria," I said, my voice calm, level, and loud enough to carry to the next table. "But he decided to stick with what he has. He believes that the value of a thing is defined by its history, not its price tag." Victoria laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Oh, please, that is just something poor people say to feel better about being poor. There is no nobility in being tattered, Natalie." I set my glass down. The sound of the crystal hitting the table echoed. "You are right," I said, locking eyes with her. "There is no nobility in being tattered, but sometimes, Victoria, the most tattered thing at the table is not the wallet. It is the character of the person looking at it." The silence that followed was absolute. Madison stopped chewing. Richard looked up from his phone, his eyebrows drawn together in confusion, as if the furniture had suddenly started speaking. Victoria's mouth opened, then closed. She blinked, her face flushing a deep, ugly red. She had never been spoken to like that. Not by me. Not by anyone in her circle. "Excuse me?" she whispered. "I think you heard me," I said pleasantly. "Is there any more quiche? It is delicious." Owen stared at me. His eyes were wide, shocked, but for the first time, there was something else in his gaze. It wasn't anger, it was awe. He looked at me like he was seeing a stranger, a dangerous stranger who had just walked through the fire and come out holding a sword. He did not defend his mother. He just reached for the water pitcher and poured me a refill. The days ticked by. I waited for the explosion. I checked my email every 10 minutes. I knew Harborline's compliance team moved fast, but the wait was agonizing. The night before the hammer was set to drop, I went to my father's house. It was raining. The sound of the drops hitting the metal roof of his garage was the soundtrack of my childhood. We sat in the kitchen, a pot of tea between us. The wallet sat in the center of the table. Dad stared at it. "Do you think Arthur would be proud?" he asked. "Or would he think I am betraying his son?" "Arthur left you the letter, Dad," I said. "He didn't leave it to Richard. He didn't leave it to Owen. He left it to you. He knew that when the time came, you would care more about the truth than the bloodline." Dad nodded slowly. He ran a hand over his face. "I never wanted to be important, Nat. I just wanted to be useful." "You are being useful," I said. "You are fixing the engine. It is just a much bigger engine this time." "And Owen?" he asked. "What happens to you and Owen when the dust settles?" I looked out the window at the rain. "I do not know. Maybe he leaves me. Maybe he hates me, but at least he will be free. He won't be living a lie anymore. Are you sure? Dad asked. Once I pick up that phone, once Glenridge makes the move, there is no undo button. You might lose your marriage. I reached across the table and put my hand on his. My hand was soft. His was rough, but the pulse underneath was the same. I am not doing this to save my marriage, I said. I am doing this to save my dignity. And yours? I do not regret protecting the people who value me. Dad, even if the whole world thinks I'm crazy. Dad smiled. It was the smile from the flashback, the one he gave me when he counted out the field trip money. It was a smile of total, unwavering love. All right then, he said. Let them call. We did not know exactly how it would go down. We did not know the hour or the minute. We just knew that the machinery of the Glenridge Stewardship Office had been engaged, somewhere in a high-rise in Manhattan. Lawyers were reading my report. Accountants were verifying the shell companies. Trustees were voting. The line was being drawn. And on the other side of that line, Richard Carlyle was probably pouring another glass of wine, thinking he was untouchable. He had no idea that the man who changed his oil was about to change his destiny. The phone did not ring that night. We sat in the quiet, two conspirators in a small kitchen, waiting for the signal that the world had turned upside down. The storm did not break with a scream. It broke with a whisper. 3 days before the scheduled family clarification dinner at the Carlyle estate, I sat Owen down at our kitchen island. The granite was cold under my elbows. Outside, the wind was howling, rattling the window panes of our upscale condo, a home bought with a down payment from a trust fund that was currently being cannibalized by his father. I had the documents spread out, the copy of his grandfather's letter, the risk analysis from Harborline, the email drafts to the Glenridge Stewardship Office. Owen, I said, my voice steady, though my hands were trembling beneath the countertop. We need to talk about the family. I told him everything. I laid out the timeline, from the moment I found the discrepancies in the Harborline data to the meeting with Elias Thorne. I explained the mechanism of the trust, the hidden clause his grandfather had inserted like a poison pill for exactly this scenario, and the role my father was about to play. I expected shock, I expected confusion, but I underestimated the depth of the Carlyle indoctrination. Owen stared at the papers, his face turning a deep, blotchy red. He stood up, knocking his bar stool back. It clattered loudly against the floor. You are working with him? Owen asked, his voice rising. You and your dad? You are conspiring against my father? I am not conspiring, Owen. I am saving. Stop, he shouted, cutting me off. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the length of the kitchen. I cannot believe this. You are doing this because of the dinner, aren't you? Because Mom made a joke about his wallet? Because Madison laughed? He turned on me, his eyes wild with a mixture of hurt and defensive anger. So my family was mean to your dad for one night. It was rude, yes, I admitted that. But this? Trying to seize control of the company? Using some 20-year-old piece of paper to humiliate my father? This is insane, Natalie. It is vindictive. You are trying to punish my mother for a few snide comments by destroying our lives. It is not about the comments. Owen! I stood up, slamming my hand on the Harborline report. Look at the numbers. Look at them. This is not emotional. This is math. Your father has leveraged the Seaport project to 400%. He is using your trust, your future children's money, to cover the interest payments on a sinking ship. If I do nothing, in 6 months, there is no Carlyle legacy. There is just a bankruptcy filing and a foreclosure sign on that house you love so much. Dad knows what he is doing, Owen insisted, though his voice wavered. He is aggressive. That is how he built the business. He did not build it, I snapped. Your grandfather built it. Your father is gambling it, and he is losing. I walked around the island and stood in front of him. I forced him to look at me. Owen, think back to that dinner. Really think about it. When they were laughing at my father, why didn't you say anything? Owen looked away. I told you, I didn't want to make a scene. No, I said softly. You didn't say anything because you are afraid of them. You are afraid that if you speak up, they will cut you off. Well, guess what? They are cutting you off anyway. Not with anger, but with incompetence. They are burning your safety net to keep themselves warm. My father loves me, Owen whispered. Does he? I asked. Or does he love that you are quiet? Does he love that you let him do whatever he wants? I took a breath. I love you, Owen. That is why I am doing this. I am not letting you go down with them. I am drawing a line. You can stand with me, or you can stand with the people who are lying to you. But I am not backing down. I am not going to let my father be their punching bag while he is the only one trying to save you. Owen stared at me. The anger was draining out of him, replaced by a terrifying hollowness. He looked at the papers again. He looked at his grandfather's signature. Then, his eyes drifted to the end of the counter. My father had stopped by earlier that morning to drop off some vegetables from his garden. He had been in a rush and had accidentally left his wallet sitting there, near the fruit bowl. It sat there now, a lump of distressed leather, stark and ugly against the pristine white marble. Owen walked over to it. He reached out and touched the cracked spine. I remember, Owen said, his voice barely audible. I remember being 10 years old. Grandpa Arthur was in the hospital. He was dying. I stayed silent, letting him speak. Dad was in the hallway, arguing with the doctors about upgrading to a VIP suite. Owen continued. But Grandpa, he asked to see Tom. He asked for your dad. Owen ran his thumb over the stitching of the wallet. I was in the corner of the room. Tom came in. He was wearing his work clothes. Grandpa Arthur grabbed his hand. I had never seen my grandfather hold my dad's hand like that. He told Tom, "Keep an eye on the boy. Richard is a shark, but the boy has a heart. Do not let the shark eat the heart." Owen looked up at me, tears standing in his eyes. I thought he meant, I didn't know what he meant, but he trusted your dad more than he trusted his own son. Yes, I said, he did. Owen closed his eyes. The internal war was raging, but the tide had turned. He was realizing that loyalty to his father meant complicity in his own destruction. Loyalty to the truth meant betraying his blood. I cannot help you, Owen said finally. I cannot be the one to pull the trigger on my dad. I cannot sit in that meeting and vote against him. I am not asking you to, I replied. I am just asking you not to warn him. Do not let him hide the money before Glenridge looks. Owen took a deep breath. He looked at the wallet one last time, then pulled his hand away. I won't say anything, he said. Do what you have to do. He walked out of the kitchen and into the bedroom, closing the door softly. It wasn't a happy ending. It wasn't a passionate reconciliation, but it was a ceasefire. He had chosen to let the truth happen, even if it hurt. The next morning, the email arrived. I was at work when my phone buzzed. It was a forwarded message from my father. Subject: Notice of Compliance Review and Activation of Oversight Protocols. To Mr. Thomas Green. From the Glenridge Stewardship Office. Dear Mr. Green, following the receipt of independent risk assessment data regarding the primary Carlyle Trust, and in accordance with the Deed of Stewardship dated 1998, we have substantiated a Level 1 breach of risk protocols, as per the instructions of the late Arthur Carlyle. We are hereby initiating the transfer of executive proxy. We request a formal video conference with you, as the designated independent monitor, to finalize the transition. This call is scheduled for Friday evening at 7 o'clock. My hands shook as I read it. Friday at 7. That was exactly when we were supposed to be sitting down for dinner at the Carlyle estate. My father added a note at the bottom. I got one. Richard got a different one. I logged into the shared family calendar, a habit Richard insisted on so he could track everyone's movements. I saw an entry pop up, forwarded from Richard's executive assistant. Subject: Routine Asset Review. Glenridge. Richard had received an email too, but it was sanitized. Glenridge was smart. They had told him they needed to clarify some structural details regarding the trust. They made it sound administrative, annoying, but routine. I could picture Richard reading it. He would be annoyed. He would roll his eyes. He would think, I will just dazzle them with the new projections and get them off my back. He did not know that the review was actually an arraignment. Later that afternoon, Richard sent a group text to the family. Richard, dinner Friday is mandatory. We have some housekeeping to do regarding family loyalty and expectations. Also, Glenridge is calling in for a brief update during dessert. I want everyone looking sharp. We need to show them that the Carlisle house is in perfect order. Victoria, I will update the menu, and Natalie, please remind your father that this is a formal discussion. If he insists on coming, he needs to understand his place. We are not discussing carburetors. I stared at the screen. The arrogance was breathtaking. They were setting the stage for my public dressing down. Richard planned to use the dinner to lecture me, to shame my father again, and then to pivot to the Glenridge call to show off his power. He was building his own scaffold. I typed back a simple reply. Natalie, we will be there. Tom is looking forward to the conversation. I put the phone down. The storm was coming. The clouds were heavy and black, and the air was thick with static. But for the first time in weeks, I wasn't afraid of the thunder. I went home to find Owen staring out the window. He looked tired, aged by 10 years in 2 days. Mom called, he said without turning around. She wants to know if I talked some sense into you. What did you tell her? I told her that you and Tom are coming to dinner, Owen said, and that she should be careful what she wishes for. Did you warn her? Owen turned to look at me. No, I didn't. He walked over and hugged me. It was a desperate, clinging hug. I hope you are right, Nat, because after Friday, nothing is ever going to be the same. I know, I whispered into his chest. I closed my eyes. I could see the table in my mind. The walnut wood, the crystal glasses, the smirk on Victoria's face, and my father, sitting there with his beat-up wallet, waiting for the phone to ring. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the script they thought they were following had been rewritten 20 years ago by a dead man who knew exactly who his son was. Friday was coming, and the check was finally due. The second time we walked through the double oak doors of the Carlisle estate, the air felt different. The last time, the house had felt like a cathedral where I was a sinner seeking absolution. Tonight, it felt like a courtroom where the verdict had already been written, and the defendants were the only ones who did not know they were on trial. My father walked beside me. He wore the same charcoal suit he had worn to my wedding, the one that was slightly tight across the shoulders. He had polished his shoes, but the leather was creased with age. He looked at the grand staircase, the oil paintings of ancestors who had bought their way into history, and he did not look impressed. He looked like a building inspector noting structural cracks in a foundation. Ready? I whispered. He patted his right pocket. Ready? We were ushered into the dining room. It was a replica of the nightmare from 2 years ago, down to the floral arrangements. White lilies. I hate lilies. They smell like funerals. Victoria was already seated, posing with a glass of Pinot Noir. She looked up as we entered, her smile tight and practiced. It did not reach her eyes. Her eyes were scanning us for weakness, for apology. Natalie, she said, not rising. And Tom, so glad you could make it on such short notice. We felt it was important to have a realignment before the chaos of the season starts. Thank you for having us. Victoria, I said. I pulled out my own chair. The scrape of wood on wood was loud in the quiet room. I sat down, spine straight, chin up. I did not apologize for being late. I did not compliment her dress. Victoria blinked. She sensed the change immediately. The submissive daughter-in-law was gone. Well, she said, signaling the servers to pour the wine. I am glad we are all here, in this family. We believe that loyalty is the currency that matters most. Sometimes, people forget that. They get distracted by outside influences. But in the end, family comes first. The Carlisle name comes first. She was looking at me, but her words were bullets aimed at my father. She was telling him that he was the distraction. Richard sat at the head of the table, scrolling on his tablet. He looked up, his face flushed with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no in 60 years. "Owen," Richard said, ignoring my father completely, "I have the legal team drawing up some adjustments for the trust. Just minor housekeeping. We are going to move some liquidity into the Seaport venture to bridge the gap until the Q3 returns hit. I need you to sign off on Monday." I looked at Owen. He was pale. He was staring at his water glass like he was trying to divine the future in the ice cubes. He knew exactly what those adjustments were. They were theft. I think we should wait. Dad?" Owen stammered. "Until after the Glenridge review." Richard laughed. It was a dismissive, barking sound. "The review? Please. That is just a formality. Some compliance officer justifying his salary. I will handle Glenridge. I have been handling them since before you were born. They just need to be reminded who generates the returns." He was so sure. He was so tragically, dangerously sure that he was the sun around which the financial universe revolved. At the other end of the table, my father sat in silence. He did not drink the wine. He placed his hands on the table, clasped together, and right there, sitting next to his silverware, was the wallet. It was the elephant in the room. The brown leather was scuffed, the stitching fraying at the corner, against the pristine white tablecloth and the glimmering silver. It looked violent. It was a stain on their perfection. Every time Richard boasted about a deal, every time Victoria made a passive-aggressive comment about breeding, I saw my father's index finger tap the leather. Tap, tap, tap. It was a metronome counting down the seconds. Madison, sitting across from me, seemed oblivious to the psychic war being waged across the roast beef. She was bored. She pulled out her phone, aiming it at her plate. "The lighting is actually good tonight," she murmured. She adjusted the angle. "Oh, wait, that contrast is kind of artistic." She snapped a photo. I watched her screen. She had framed her glass of wine, the expensive floral centerpiece, and in the background, slightly out of focus, but unmistakable, was my father's beat-up wallet. Captioned, "Rustic Vibes." She giggled, typing with her thumbs. "It is ironic. People love irony." I looked at the wallet in the photo. She thought it was a prop. She did not know it was the gavel. "You seem quiet tonight." "Tom," Richard said suddenly, cutting through the murmur of conversation. He sliced his meat aggressively. "Usually you have some anecdote about a carburetor or a fishing trip to share. Cat got your tongue?" "Just listening." "Richard," Dad said. His voice was calm, devoid of the nervousness he used to show. "Just listening to how you run things." "Well, you should take notes," Richard sneered. "It takes a certain kind of mind to maintain a legacy like this. It is not something you can learn in a garage." Victoria chimed in, leaning forward. "We are just saying, Tom, that we have done a lot for Natalie. We welcomed her, we elevated her, and frankly, we expect a certain level of gratitude. It feels lately like there has been a lack of appreciation for the platform we have provided." I felt the heat rise in my chest, not the heat of embarrassment, but the cold fire of clarity. "Elevated me?" I asked. My voice was soft, but it stopped the forks halfway to mouths. Victoria looked at me. "Excuse me?" "You said you elevated me," I repeated, looking her dead in the eye. As if I was something low that needed to be lifted, as if my father's hard work, the work that paid for my education, the work that kept a roof over our heads, was something to be ashamed of. "Oh, stop being so dramatic. Natalie," Victoria waved her hand. "We simply mean that you have stepped into a larger world, a world of complexities." "Complexity does not mean superiority, Victoria," I said, "and simplicity does not mean stupidity." The room went dead silent. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It was 5 minutes to 7. Richard slammed his fork down. "Now listen here. I have had enough of this attitude. You walk into my house, eat my food, and lecture my wife? You should be thanking your lucky stars that Owen looked past your background. If it wasn't for this family, your father would still be—" "Dad, stop." The voice came from beside me. It was Owen. Richard froze. He looked at his son. "What did you say?" "I said stop," Owen said. He did not look up, but his voice was firm. "Tom is a guest, and he is Natalie's father. Treat him with respect." Victoria gasped. She looked at Owen as if he had just spoken in tongues. "Owen, are you taking their side?" "It is not about sides, Mom," Owen said, finally lifting his head. His eyes were tired, haunted. "It is about decency. Just stop talking about the money. For once, just stop." Richard's face turned a mottled purple. The veins in his neck bulged. "I am the only reason there is money to talk about. I carry this family. I make the hard decisions while you play at being a humanitarian. You think this lifestyle is free? You think the world is nice?" He pointed a shaking finger at my father. "And you," Richard spat, "sitting there with that smug look, you think you are better than us because you work with your hands? You are nothing. You are a footnote." My father did not flinch. He did not blink. He just looked at Richard with a profound, terrifying pity. "I am not a footnote, Richard," Dad said softly. "I am the mechanic, and when the car breaks down, the mechanic is the most important man in the world." Richard opened his mouth to scream, to fire back some venomous insult, to throw us out of his house. But he never got the chance. A sound cut through the tension. It was a generic, digital ringtone. Not a symphony, not a chime, just a standard, default ring. It was coming from the table. Everyone looked down. My father's phone was sitting next to the wallet. The screen lit up, bright in the dim room. The caller ID was visible to everyone. It scrolled across the screen in large, white letters. Glenridge Stewardship Office. Video call request. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Richard stared at the phone. He blinked. He looked at his own phone, which was silent. Then he looked back at my father's phone. "Why?" Richard's voice faltered. "Why are they calling you?" Victoria looked from the phone to my father, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrific comprehension. She looked at the wallet. She looked at the calm set of my father's jaw. I checked my watch. It was exactly 7 o'clock. "You should probably answer that, Dad," I said. My voice was the only steady thing in the room. "I think they are ready to start the review." My father reached out. His hand was steady. He pressed the green button on the screen. "Hello," Dad said, his voice filling the silent dining room. "This is Tom Green. I am here." Richard stood up, his chair crashing backward onto the floor. "What is going on? Tom, put that phone down. That is my family office. Why do you have their number?" Dad didn't look at him. He propped the phone up against the water pitcher, facing the room. On the small screen, 3 men and a woman in dark suits were sitting around a conference table in a high-rise office. They looked serious. They looked official. "Good evening, Mr. Green," the woman in the center said. Her voice was crisp, professional, and amplified by the speakerphone. "We have convened the emergency board as per the deed of stewardship. We are ready to proceed with the transfer of executive authority, pending your acceptance." Richard made a sound that was half gasp, half choke. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "Transfer?" Richard whispered. "Transfer of what?" The woman on the screen paused. She seemed to see Richard for the first time in the background of the video feed. She did not look intimidated. She looked at him like he was a liability she was about to write off. "Mr. Carlyle," she said coolly, "we were not aware you would be present, but perhaps it is for the best. We are transferring the voting rights of the primary trust to the independent monitor." She turned her gaze back to the camera, addressing the man sitting quietly next to the beat-up leather wallet. "We await your instructions, Mr. Green." Victoria stared at the vibrating phone with the kind of disdain usually reserved for a stain on a silk carpet. She picked up her wine glass, her manicured nails tapping against the crystal stem in an impatient rhythm. "Really, Tom," she said, her voice dripping with irritation, If that is someone trying to sell you car insurance or a warranty for that ancient sedan of yours, you can simply decline it. We are in the middle of dinner. It is incredibly rude to leave it ringing." My father did not flinch. He did not rush to silence the noise. Instead, he reached out with a steady hand and pressed the speaker icon. The sound of the ringtone cut off, replaced by the hollow, digital silence of an open line. "I apologize. Victoria," Dad said, his voice calm and leveled. "But I think you are going to want to hear this. This call concerns everyone at this table." "Don't be ridiculous," Richard snapped, reaching for the phone to end the call himself. "I am not listening to—" "Miss Green?" The voice that floated out of the tiny speaker was not a telemarketer. It was crisp, authoritative, and terrifyingly neutral. It was the voice of a man who charged $1,000 an hour to deliver bad news. Richard's hand froze midair. He recognized the voice. It was Marcus Sterling, the senior compliance officer at the Glenridge Stewardship Office. Richard had feared that voice for 20 years. "Yes, Mr. Sterling," Dad said, leaning forward slightly. "I am here, and I have the Carlyle family present." "Thank you, Mr. Green," Sterling said. The respect in his tone was unmistakable. It was not the patronizing tone people usually took with my father. It was the deference of a subordinate speaking to a superior. "We are proceeding with the formal notification regarding the primary trust." Victoria looked at Richard, confusion knitting her brow. "Richard? Why is Marcus calling him?" Richard did not answer. His face had gone the color of ash. Sterling continued, his voice filling the dining room like a rising flood. "Mr. Green, following the submission of the independent risk assessment provided by Harborline Quant Lab, the Board of Trustees has convened an emergency session. We have reviewed the leverage ratios regarding North Atlantic Ventures and the associated shell entities used to mask the debt exposure." Sterling paused, allowing the legal weight of those words to settle over the roast beef. "We have confirmed a structural breach of the risk protocols established by the late Arthur Carlyle in 1998, Sterling said. "Consequently, under Clause 14B of the Deed of Stewardship, the voting rights for the entirety of the Class A holdings are immediately suspended for the current board." He took a breath. "Effective as of 6 o'clock this evening, executive control has been transferred to the designated independent monitor, that is you, Mr. Green, until the compliance audit is complete. The Carlyle Legacy Family Office answers to you." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum. I saw Madison lower her phone, her mouth slightly open. I saw Owen staring at the device as if it were a bomb. Then, Richard laughed. It was a wet, panicked sound. "This is a mistake," Richard stammered, leaning toward the phone. "Marcus, listen to me. There has been a misunderstanding. The Harborline report is flawed. I can explain the leverage. It is a temporary bridge loan. You cannot just flip a switch based on one report." "Mr. Carlyle," Sterling's voice cut through the air, colder than liquid nitrogen. "We have seen the wire transfers. We have tracked the movement of capital from the Grandchildren's Trust into the North Atlantic accounts. We know about the Cayman subsidiary you established last month to hide the losses on the Seaport project. There is no misunderstanding. The evidence is conclusive." Richard recoiled as if he had been slapped. He slumped back in his chair. The fight draining out of him, the mention of the Cayman subsidiary was the nail in the coffin. He thought that was his secret. He thought he was invisible. Victoria stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. Her face was a mask of fury and disbelief. "This is insane," she hissed. "Who do you think you are? You are talking to Richard Carlyle. And you," she turned on my father, her finger pointing at his chest. "You are a mechanic. You fix brakes. You do not run multi-million-dollar estates. This is some kind of sick joke. Did Natalie put you up to this?" "Mrs. Carlyle," Sterling said from the phone, his tone hardening. "Please be advised that this call is being recorded for legal purposes. Insulting the independent monitor does not alter the terms of the trust." My father ignored her. He looked at the phone. He did not look triumphant. He did not look angry. He looked like a man who had just opened the hood of a car and found the engine block cracked in half. He looked disappointed. "Mr. Sterling," Dad said quietly, "I need to ask you something. As the monitor, do I have the authority to issue an immediate stop work order on the risky assets?" "Yes, Mr. Green," Sterling replied instantly. "You have full executive proxy." "Then I want the seaport expansion paused," Dad said. "I want the capital flow from the trust frozen immediately. No more transfers to the shell companies. We stop the bleeding tonight. We protect the principal. Is that clear?" "Abundantly clear, Yi," Sterling said. "We will issue the freeze orders to the banks within the hour." Victoria stared at him, her mouth agape. She looked at the man she had mocked for his frayed collar and his cheap shoes, and she saw him issue a command that froze her entire world. "You cannot do that," she whispered. "You will ruin us." "He is saving you," I said. My voice broke the spell. Everyone turned to look at me. I was sitting with my hands folded, looking at my husband's family with a clarity that hurt. "You asked who he is." "Victoria," I said, standing up slowly. "You asked why a mechanic has the keys to your kingdom." I walked over to the table where the phone lay. I picked up the beat-up leather wallet that was sitting next to it. I held it up. "You thought this was trash," I said. "You laughed at it. But inside this wallet, for 20 years, my father carried a letter from Arthur Carlyle, your husband's father, the man who actually built this empire." I looked at Richard. He was refusing to meet my eyes. "Arthur knew you." "Richard," I said. "He knew you were a gambler. He knew you would eventually risk everything. Owen's future, the employees, the legacy, just to feed your ego. So he created a failsafe. He gave the power to the one man he knew could not be bought. The one man who saved this company from bankruptcy 20 years ago when you were too busy playing golf to notice the foundation was rotting." I placed the wallet back on the table. It landed with a soft thud. "My father is not stealing your company," I said. "He is the only reason you still have one." On the phone, Sterling cleared his throat. "Mr. Green, we would like to schedule a formal briefing tomorrow morning at 9. We suggest Mr. Owen Carlyle attend as well. As the primary beneficiary, we need to discuss the restructuring plan." "We will be there," Dad said. "Very good. Good night, Mr. Green." The line clicked dead. The room was silent again, but the silence had changed texture. It was no longer the silence of polite society. It was the silence of a ruins. The wallet sat on the table. Under the chandelier light, the cracks in the leather seemed to glow. It wasn't an eyesore anymore. It was an object of immense, terrifying gravity. It was the most valuable thing in the room, and it had been there the whole time, right under their noses, while they laughed at it. Richard stared at the black screen of the phone. He looked small. The arrogance that usually puffed him up like a balloon had vanished, leaving behind a frightened old man in an expensive suit. "It is a power grab," Richard muttered, trying to find his footing. "That is all it is. He wants to control us. He wants to humiliate us because he is jealous." He looked at Owen, desperation creeping into his eyes. "Owen, you see that, right? You see what they are doing? They plotted this. They want to take what is yours." Owen sat motionless. His face was pale, his eyes wide and dark. He looked from his father to the wallet, and then to me. His hand was trembling as he reached for his water glass, but he didn't drink. He just gripped it until his knuckles turned white. "Dad," Owen said. His voice was cracked, barely a whisper. "Don't listen to them, son," Richard pleaded. "We fight this. We get the lawyers. We—" "Dad," Owen said again, louder this time. He stood up. He looked down at the man who had raised him, the man he had idolized, the man he had been too afraid to question. "Did you do it?" Owen asked. "Do what? I told you, it is complicated financial—" "Did you move the money?" Owen's voice broke. "Did you take the funds from the trust, my children's trust, and put them into the shell companies? Did you lie to me when you said the returns were real?" Richard opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Victoria for help, but she was staring at the wall, catatonic. "Answer me!" Owen shouted. It was the first time I had ever heard him raise his voice at his father. The sound echoed off the high ceilings, shattering the last illusion of the perfect family dinner. Richard flinched. He looked down at his plate. I had to," he whispered. "The market turned against us. I needed liquidity. I was going to put it back. Once the Seaport deal closed, I was going to put it all back. No one would have known." "You gambled it," Owen said. Tears were streaming down his face now, unashamed. "You gambled us." He looked at me. There was so much pain in his eyes, but there was also an apology. He walked around the table, past his mother who was frozen in her chair, past his father who was crumbling into his soup. He stopped in front of my father. Owen looked at the mechanic in the cheap suit. He looked at the grease stains that were permanently etched into Dad's cuticles. "I am sorry," Owen said. He choked on the words. "I am so sorry, Tom." Dad stood up. He didn't gloat. He didn't lecture. He just reached out and put a heavy hand on Owen's shoulder. "It is all right, son," Dad said gently. "We are going to fix it. That is what we do. We fix things." Dad picked up his phone. He picked up his wallet. He looked at the table of food that had gone cold, at the people who had mocked him for years, and he simply nodded. "We will see you at the office at 9, Dad said to the room. He turned to me. "Ready, Nat?" "Ready?" I said. We walked out of the dining room, leaving the Carlyles sitting in the wreckage of their own ego. The last thing I saw before I turned the corner was Madison staring at her phone screen, looking at the photo she had taken of the wallet, realizing too late that she had captured the exact moment the world changed. The silence in the room was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a dam that had just burst, leaving everyone staring at the wreckage. We had turned to leave, but Richard's voice, cracked and desperate, stopped us at the archway. "I had to do it," Richard whispered. He was slumped in his chair, looking not at us, but at his trembling hands. "You do not understand the pressure. The market is a beast. Those advisors, those cowards at Glenridge, they tell me to play it safe, to be conservative, but you cannot build an empire by being safe." He looked up, his eyes wet and pleading, seeking validation from the very people he had tormented. "I took a shortcut. Yes, I moved the capital because I know the market better than they do. I thought if I could just get the Seaport project finished, I could put the money back before anyone noticed. I ignored my father's will because Arthur was an old man who had lost his nerve. I thought I was protecting the family." He pointed a shaking finger at my father. "And I ignored you, Tom, because you are a mechanic. I thought you were just a bystander. A man who fixes brakes does not understand the speed of high finance." I let go of the doorframe. I walked back to the table. The anger that had been simmering in my gut for 2 years had cooled into something hard and solid, like steel. "That is where you are wrong, Richard," I said. My voice was calm, but it filled the room. "You think finance is about speed. My father knows that the faster you go, the better your brakes need to be." I picked up the wallet from where my father had left it. I held it in both hands. The leather was warm. I walked over to the center of the table, pushing aside the expensive floral arrangement that cost more than my dad's weekly grocery bill. I placed the beat-up, scarred wallet right in the middle, on the pristine white runner. "Look at it," I commanded. "For 2 years, I have watched you sneer at this. I sat in this chair and swallowed my pride while you turned my father's life into a punchline. I let you mock his clothes. I let you mock his car. I let you mock this wallet." I looked at Madison, who was pale and silent. I looked at Victoria, whose face was a mask of frozen shock. "I stayed silent because I loved Owen," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I thought if I was patient, if I was good, you would eventually see us. But you never looked. You saw a tattered wallet and you assumed the man holding it was broken, but you were wrong." I leaned in, my hands resting on the table. "This wallet is not tattered because it is cheap. It is tattered because it has been used to build a life. It is worn down from paying for my college tuition, dollar by dollar. It is scarred from 20 years of hard, honest work. The kind of work that saved this family from bankruptcy 2 decades ago. The wallet is not what is broken here. Victoria, it is your perspective that is broken. Your ability to see the worth of a human being is what is in tatters. I straightened up. And today, the insults stop. This wallet has taken its last needle. Victoria's eyes narrowed. She did not look ashamed. She looked cornered. And like any cornered animal, she lashed out. "Oh, spare us the melodrama," she hissed, standing up to match my height. "Do not pretend this is about dignity. Natalie, we are not stupid. This is a coup. You and your father planned this. You seduced my son. You infiltrated our home, and now you are using some archaic clause to seize control of the Carlyle assets. You are nothing but common thieves with a better script." The air left the room. It was the final severing. With that one sentence, she killed any hope of reconciliation. She proved that she would rather believe in a conspiracy than admit she was wrong. My father stepped forward. He did not raise his voice. He did not look angry. He looked at Victoria with a profound, weary disappointment. "I am not stealing anything, Mrs. Carlyle," Tom said. "I have just issued the order to Glen Ridge. We are freezing the high-risk transfers. We are pausing the seaport expansion until the books are audited. I am doing this to ensure that when Owen is my age, there is still a company left to run. I am doing this to make sure the hundreds of people you employ do not lose their pensions because Richard wanted to play God with the market." Dad paused, and his eyes hardened. "But let me be clear about one thing. I will protect the assets, but I will no longer allow anyone in this house to disrespect my daughter. That ends tonight." He turned to Owen. My husband was standing by the window, caught between the two halves of his life. He looked at his mother, furious and proud. He looked at his father, broken and exposed, and he looked at me. "Owen," I said softly, "I do not love the Carlyle money. I never did. I loved you because I thought you were different from them. I thought you saw the world clearly. But now the curtain is pulled back. You know the truth. You know who saved this family, and you know who imperiled it." I took a step toward him. "You have to ask yourself a question. Owen, where do you stand? Do you stand with the appearance of perfection, or do you stand with the truth?" The silence stretched out, agonizing and long. The grandfather clock ticked in the hallway. Owen looked at his mother. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse, "it is not a conspiracy. It is a rescue." Victoria gasped, clutching her pearls. "Owen, how dare you?" Owen shook his head. He walked over to the table and looked down at the wallet. He remembered the story of his grandfather. He remembered the truth. "I am sorry, Mom, but Dad lied to us. He gambled our future." Owen turned to my father. He stood straight, wiping a tear from his cheek. "Tom, I am sorry. I sat here and let them laugh at you. I was a coward. I want to be on the side of the people who do not look down on the man who saved them." He looked at me. "I am going to the Glen Ridge meeting tomorrow. I will sign whatever needs to be signed to restructure the board. I am done hiding." I looked at him, and I felt a knot in my chest loosen. It wasn't a perfect fix. The damage was deep, but it was a start. "I am glad, Owen," I said. "I really am." "Are you coming home?" he asked, his voice fragile. I looked at my father, standing by the door, waiting for me. I looked at the suffocating opulence of the Carlyle dining room. "Not tonight," I said. "I am going to stay with my dad. I will be at the meeting tomorrow. But tonight, I need to be with people who respect where I come from. The rest. We will let our actions prove what happens next." I picked up the wallet from the table. I handed it to my father. "Let's go, Dad." We walked out. We left the crystal glasses and the imported wine. We left Richard weeping into his hands and Victoria staring at the wall in disbelief. We walked out of the fortress and into the cool, clean night air. The valet brought my father's car around. The engine sputtered a little as it idled, a sound that used to make me cringe, but tonight sounded like music. Dad opened the passenger door for me before he got in. He paused under the glow of the porch light. He opened the wallet. He bypassed the cash, bypassed the credit cards. He slid his thumb over the plastic window and looked at the faded, yellowing photograph of my mother. She was smiling in the photo, young and hopeful, unaware of the years of struggle that lay ahead. Dad smiled down at her. "You see that, Martha?" he whispered to the picture. "The old wallet finally did a job worth doing." He looked up at me, his eyes shining with tears. "She would have been real proud of you tonight, Natty." I felt a sob rise in my throat, but it came out as a laugh. I hugged him, right there in the driveway of the mansion that had tried to crush us. I hugged him, and his grease-stained suit, and his beautiful, tattered heart. "She would be proud of you, Dad," I said. We got into the car and drove away, leaving the gates of the Carlisle estate behind us in the rearview mirror. The final image of the story is not a courtroom or a jail cell. It is a boardroom in a glass tower in Manhattan the next morning. The table is polished mahogany. The executives of the Glenridge Stewardship Office are seated in rows, their pens poised, their faces serious. At the head of the table sits Richard, looking small and defeated. Next to him is Owen, looking determined. And opposite them sits Tom Green. He is wearing his flannel shirt because he had to go to the shop later. He looks out of place among the Italian suits, and yet he is the only one who truly belongs. "Mr. Green," the chairman says, leaning forward with genuine deference, "we are ready to hear your proposal for the risk mitigation strategy." Tom opens the beat-up leather wallet. He pulls out a folded piece of notebook paper where he has written down his thoughts. He does not use big words. He does not use jargon. "First thing," Tom says, his voice steady, "we stop spending money we have not earned. Second thing, we take care of the people who actually do the work." The room nods. They listen. They write it down. For the first time in the history of the Carlisle legacy, they are listening to the man with the tattered wallet, not because they pity him, but because they finally understand that he is the only one in the room who knows the true value of $1, and more importantly, the true value of a man. The revenge was not destroying them. The revenge was forcing them to finally, truly, see us. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Natalie and Tom's victory. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people.